What if I told you that a single whispered confession from a hungry child would change the life of a UFC champion forever? What you're about to witness isn't just another celebrity story. It's a raw, unfiltered journey that will challenge everything you think you know about fame, responsibility, and the power of human connection. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning how well we really know the people we admire. The fluorescent lights of the community center in Venice Beach cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It was a typical Tuesday evening in March, and the air carried that familiar mix of ocean salt and urban grit that defined this corner of Los Angeles. Ronda Rousey adjusted her baseball cap lower over her eyes as she walked through the entrance, hoping to avoid recognition. She'd been coming to these youth mentorship sessions for 3 months now, part of her court-mandated community service, following a highly publicized altercation outside a Beverly Hills restaurant. The incident had been blown out of proportion by the media, as usual. A photographer had gotten too aggressive, she'd reacted defensively, and suddenly she was the villain in every headline. Her publicist had suggested community service as a way to rehabilitate her image, but Ronda had chosen this particular program for reasons she kept to herself. Something about working with kids felt right, even if she'd never admit it publicly. "Miss Ronda!" called out Marcus, a 12-year-old with an infectious grin and a Lakers jersey that had seen better days. He bounded over with the enthusiasm that only kids possessed, completely unaware of her celebrity status. To him, she was just another volunteer who showed up every week to help with homework and listen to their stories. "Hey, Marcus, how's that math homework coming along?" Ronda asked, genuinely interested. Over the past few months, she'd discovered something unexpected about herself. She actually enjoyed these interactions. There was something refreshing about being around people who didn't want anything from her except her time and attention. The community center served kids from the surrounding neighborhoods, many of whom came from single-parent households where making ends meet was a daily struggle. Ronda had grown up with her own challenges, but being here reminded her just how fortunate she'd been in many ways. These kids faced obstacles she'd never had to consider. As the evening progressed, Ronda moved between different groups, helping with homework, listening to stories about school drama, and occasionally sharing sanitized versions of her own experiences. She'd learned to be careful about what she revealed. These kids didn't need to hear about the darker aspects of fame or the pressure that came with being in the public eye constantly. It was during the quiet time, when most of the kids were packing up their belongings, that she noticed Zara sitting alone in the corner. The 8-year-old girl had been coming to the center for about as long as Ronda had been volunteering, but she was always quiet, always observing rather than participating. Tonight something seemed different about her demeanor. Zara was small for her age, with expressive brown eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than any child should possess. Her clothes were clean but clearly hand-me-downs, and she carried herself with a careful precision that suggested she was used to being invisible. Ronda had tried to engage with her before, but Zara always politely deflected, preferring to focus on her coloring books or homework. "Hey, Zara," Ronda said softly, approaching the corner where the girl sat. "How are you doing tonight?" Zara looked up, her eyes meeting Ronda's briefly before darting away. "I'm okay, Miss Ronda." But something in her voice suggested otherwise. Ronda had learned to read people during her fighting career. It was a survival skill in the octagon and in life. Body language, tone of voice, the things people didn't say often revealed more than their words. "Mind if I sit with you for a minute?" Ronda asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside Zara. The girl nodded, scooting over slightly to make room. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the other kids gathered their things and said goodbye to the volunteers. The community center was winding down for the evening, but Ronda wasn't in any hurry to leave. "Are you hungry?" Ronda asked suddenly, noticing how Zara's eyes had lingered on the snack table earlier in the evening. It was a simple question, but something about the way Zara's shoulders tensed told Ronda she'd hit on something important. Zara hesitated, her small hands fidgeting with the corner of her coloring book. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, so quiet that Ronda had to lean in to hear her. "I haven't eaten in 3 days." The words hit Ronda like a physical blow. She'd heard difficult stories during her time at the community center, kids dealing with divorce, bullying, academic struggles, But this was different. This was a child admitting to something that no kid should ever have to experience in a country as wealthy as America. Rhonda's first instinct was to react immediately, to fix the problem right then and there. But something in Zara's demeanor told her to proceed carefully. The girl had trusted her with this information, and how Ronda responded in the next few moments would determine whether Zara would ever trust an adult again. "Can you tell me what's been happening at home?" Ronda asked gently, keeping her voice steady despite the anger and concern building inside her. Zara's story came out in fragments, whispered confessions that painted a picture of a household in crisis. Her mother worked 2 jobs, but had been sick with the flu for the past week, unable to work and therefore unable to buy groceries. Her older brother was supposed to be watching her, but he was 16 and more interested in hanging out with his friends than taking care of his little sister. "Mama doesn't know," Zara whispered. Her eyes filling with tears, she was trying hard not to shed. "She's been sleeping a lot because she's sick and I didn't want to bother her. She works so hard for us." The protective instinct that had made Ronda a fierce competitor in the octagon now focused entirely on this small girl sitting beside her. But this wasn't a problem she could solve with physical strength or determination alone. This required a different kind of strategy, one that involved understanding systems and resources she'd never had to navigate herself. "Zara, you did the right thing by telling me," Ronda said, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "And we're going to figure this out together, okay? But first, let's get you something to eat right now." The community center's kitchen was closed for the evening, but Ronda remembered seeing vending machines near the entrance. She guided Zara toward them, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. This wasn't just about buying a bag of chips or a candy bar. This was about addressing a systemic problem that was affecting a child's basic survival. As they walked, Ronda found herself thinking about her own childhood, about the times her family had struggled financially, but had always managed to put food on the table. She thought about the millions of dollars she'd earned during her fighting career, money that had bought her luxury cars and expensive homes, while kids like Zara went hungry just a few miles away from her Beverly Hills neighborhood. The vending machine offerings were limited: chips, candy, crackers, and a few healthier options like granola bars and nuts. Ronda bought several items, creating a small feast that would at least address Zara's immediate hunger. But even as she watched the girl eat with obvious relief, her mind was working on longer-term solutions. "Zara, I need to ask you something important," Ronda said, as they sat on a bench outside the community center. "Would it be okay if I talk to your mum? Not to get anyone in trouble, but to see how we can help your family get through this difficult time." The fear that flashed across Zara's face was immediate and heartbreaking. "She'll be mad that I told someone. She always says we need to handle our problems as a family." Ronda understood that pride, that desire to maintain dignity even in the face of overwhelming challenges. She'd seen it in her own family, in the families of other fighters who'd grown up with limited resources. But she also knew that sometimes accepting help was the bravest thing a person could do. "What if I told you that asking for help when you need it is actually one of the strongest things a person can do?" Ronda said, thinking about her own struggles with accepting support during difficult times in her career. "And what if I promised that any help we provide would be done with respect for your family's dignity?" As they talked, other volunteers and staff members began leaving the community center. Ronda waved goodbye to Marcus and several other kids, but her attention remained focused on Zara. She was beginning to understand that this moment was about more than just one hungry child. It was about the kind of person she wanted to be when the cameras weren't rolling and the crowds weren't cheering. The drive to Zara's apartment complex took them through neighborhoods that most of Ronda's celebrity friends never saw. The buildings were older, showing signs of deferred maintenance, but they were clean, and the residents she observed seemed to take pride in their community. This wasn't about poverty as a character flaw. This was about hard-working families facing temporary crises that could happen to anyone. Zara's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had probably been modern in the 1970s. As they climbed the stairs, Ronda could hear the sounds of family life through thin walls: televisions, conversations, children playing. It reminded her that behind every door was a story, a family doing their best with the resources they had available. When Zara's mother, Patricia, answered the door, Ronda could immediately see where the girl got her quiet strength. Patricia was a woman in her early 30s who looked exhausted but maintained her composure even when faced with an unexpected visitor. She was clearly still recovering from illness, but she stood straight and looked Rhonda directly in the eye. "Mrs. Johnson, my name is Rhonda. I volunteer at the community center where Zara spends her evenings. She mentioned that your family is going through a difficult time right now, and I was hoping we could talk about how the community center might be able to provide some support." Patricia's eyes moved between Rhonda and her daughter, and Rhonda could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Pride warred with practical necessity and the love for her child that was evident in every gesture she made. "Zara, baby, what did you tell this lady?" Patricia asked, her voice gentle but concerned. Before Zara could respond, Rhonda stepped in. "She told me that she's a smart, brave girl who loves her family very much. She also mentioned that you've been sick and that things have been challenging lately. I want you to know that reaching out for temporary support doesn't reflect on your character as a mother. It shows how much you love your children." The conversation that followed was delicate, requiring Rhonda to navigate Patricia's pride while addressing the immediate crisis facing the family. She learned that Patricia worked as a certified nursing assistant at a local hospital and as a part-time house cleaner on weekends. The flu had knocked her out of work for a week, and without paid sick leave, the family's already tight budget had been stretched beyond its limits. "I've been doing this on my own since Zara's father left 3 years ago," Patricia explained, her voice steady but tired. "We've always managed to get by, but this week has been harder than usual. I was planning to go back to work tomorrow, even though I'm not completely recovered yet." Rhonda found herself thinking about the community center's resources, about the networks of support that existed in this neighborhood, and about her own ability to make a difference. But she also recognized that this wasn't about her swooping in as a savior. It was about connecting a family in crisis with sustainable resources that would help them maintain their independence and dignity. "The community center has a food pantry program that many families use during difficult times," Rhonda explained. "It's not charity, it's a community resource, like a library or a park. Families contribute when they can and take what they need when they need it. Would you be open to learning more about that?" As they talked, Rhonda began to understand the complex web of challenges facing families like the Johnsons. Patricia's work schedule made it difficult to access many social services that operated during business hours. Transportation was limited, making it hard to get to food banks or assistance offices, and the stigma associated with asking for help meant that many families suffered in silence rather than reaching out for support. But Rhonda also saw the strength and resilience that existed in this community. Neighbors looked out for each other. Kids like Zara were being raised with strong values despite economic challenges, and families like the Johnsons were working hard to build better futures for their children. The evening was getting late, and Rhonda knew she needed to respect the family's routine while also ensuring that immediate needs were addressed. She'd brought groceries from a nearby store, enough to get the family through the next few days while longer-term solutions were put in place. "I want to be clear about something," Rhonda said as she prepared to leave. "This isn't about me doing something for you. This is about neighbors helping neighbors. The community center exists because people in this neighborhood believe in taking care of each other. You're not receiving charity. You're accessing a resource that you have every right to use." As she drove home that night, Rhonda found herself thinking about the contrast between her Beverly Hills lifestyle and the reality she'd just witnessed. The guilt was overwhelming at first. How could she live in such luxury while kids like Zara went hungry? But gradually the guilt transformed into something more productive, a sense of responsibility and purpose that she hadn't felt since her fighting career had ended. The next morning, Rhonda woke up with a clarity of purpose that had been missing from her life for months. She'd been drifting since retiring from competition, unsure of how to channel the drive and determination that had made her a champion. But last night had shown her a different kind of fight, one that required different skills, but was no less important than anything she'd done in the octagon. She started making phone calls, reaching out to contacts in the non-profit world, researching food insecurity programs, and learning about the resources available to families in crisis. What she discovered was both encouraging and frustrating. There were programs and services available, but navigating them required time, knowledge, and persistence that many working families simply didn't have. By the time she arrived at the community center that evening, Rhonda had a plan, but more importantly, she had a new understanding of her role in this community. She wasn't here to be a savior or to solve problems through grand gestures. She was here to be a consistent presence, a reliable resource, and a bridge between families in need and the support systems that existed to help them. Zara was already there when Rhonda arrived, working on homework at one of the tables. The girl looked up and smiled, a genuine, bright smile that told Rhonda everything she needed to know about how the previous evening had been received by the family. "Hi, Miss Rhonda," Zara said, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. "Mama made breakfast this morning, and she said to tell you thank you." The simple statement carried more weight than any championship belt Rhonda had ever won. This was what making a real difference looked like. Not the flashy victories that made headlines, but the quiet moments when a child could focus on homework instead of hunger, when a mother could recover from illness without worrying about feeding her family. Over the following weeks, Rhonda's involvement with the community center evolved from court-mandated service to genuine commitment. She found herself arriving earlier and staying later, not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand the complex challenges facing the families in this neighborhood. What had started as a single encounter with Zara had opened her eyes to a reality that existed just miles from her privileged world. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. It was gradual, built through countless small interactions and observations. Rhonda began to see patterns in the stories she heard: parents working multiple jobs but still struggling to make ends meet, children taking on adult responsibilities to help their families survive, and a community that had learned to rely on itself because outside support was often unreliable or insufficient. Patricia Johnson had returned to work, but the family's situation remained precarious. One missed day of work due to illness or a child's emergency could still throw their budget into chaos. Rhonda learned that this wasn't unique to the Johnsons. Many of the families connected to the community center lived with this constant uncertainty, always one crisis away from serious hardship. "The thing people don't understand," explained Maria Santos, the community center's director, during one of their conversations, "is that most of these families are working. They're not looking for handouts, they're looking for stability and opportunity. But when you're spending 60% of your income on rent and another 20% on transportation to get to work, there's not much left for emergencies." Maria had been running the center for 8 years, and she'd seen how economic pressures affected families in ways that went far beyond simple financial stress. Children who worried about whether there would be food at home had trouble concentrating in school. Parents who worked multiple jobs had less time to spend with their kids, creating gaps that the community center tried to fill but couldn't completely address. Rhonda found herself thinking about these conversations during her morning runs along the beach in Santa Monica. The contrast was stark. She could afford to live in one of the most expensive areas in the country, while families just a few miles inland struggled with basic necessities. But rather than wallowing in guilt, she began to see this as an opportunity to use her resources and platform in ways that could create lasting change. The idea came to her during a particularly difficult evening at the community center. A 10-year-old boy named David had broken down in tears while trying to complete his homework, overwhelmed by hunger and worry about his family's financial situation. His mother was working a double shift at a local restaurant, and his older sister was babysitting younger siblings. David was essentially on his own, trying to manage responsibilities that no child should have to handle. "What if we could create a more comprehensive support system?" Rhonda asked Maria after they'd helped David with his homework and ensured he had something to eat. Not just emergency assistance, but ongoing support that helps families build stability. Maria's eyes lit up with interest, but also with the caution that came from years of seeing well-intentioned initiatives fail due to lack of sustained commitment or understanding of community needs. "What did you have in mind?" Maria asked. Rhonda had been researching successful community programs across the country, learning about models that addressed food insecurity, educational support, and economic development in integrated ways. She discovered that the most effective programs were those that were developed in partnership with the communities they served, rather than imposed from outside. I've been thinking about a program that combines immediate assistance with longer-term capacity building, Ronda explained. Food security, educational support, job training, financial literacy, all integrated and delivered in a way that respects the dignity and expertise of the families we're working with. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Maria sharing insights from her years of community work, and Ronda contributing ideas based on her research and growing understanding of the neighborhood's needs. They talked about the importance of addressing root causes rather than just symptoms, about the need for programs that empowered families rather than creating dependency. As they planned, Zara appeared in the doorway, having finished her homework and cleaned up her workspace. She'd been coming to the center every evening, and Ronda had watched her confidence grow as her basic needs were met, and she no longer had to worry about hunger. "Miss Ronda, are you going to keep coming here even after your community service is finished?" Zara asked, her question direct and honest in the way that only children could manage. The question caught Ronda off guard, not because she didn't know the answer, but because it forced her to articulate something she'd been feeling but hadn't yet put into words. Her court-mandated service would be completed in 2 weeks, but the idea of walking away from this community felt impossible now. "Yes, Zara, I'm going to keep coming," Ronda said. And as she spoke the words, she felt a sense of certainty that had been missing from her life since her fighting career had ended. "This has become important to me, and I want to be part of helping make things better for families like yours." Zara nodded solemnly, as if she'd been testing Ronda's commitment and was satisfied with the answer. "Good, because Marcus said you might leave, and I told him you wouldn't, because you're not like the other volunteers who come for a few weeks and then disappear." The observation was more perceptive than Ronda had expected from an 8-year-old, but it also highlighted something important about community work. Consistency and reliability were more valuable than grand gestures or short-term interventions. Over the next several days, Ronda began reaching out to her network in ways she'd never done before. Instead of calling agents and promoters, she was contacting non-profit leaders, social workers, and community organizers. Instead of discussing fight strategies and media appearances, she was learning about grant writing, program evaluation, and community engagement best practices. The response was mixed. Some people in her circle were supportive, but clearly saw this as a phase she was going through, a way to rehabilitate her public image before returning to her previous lifestyle. Others were more skeptical, questioning whether someone with her background could really understand or effectively address complex social issues, but there were also unexpected allies. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a pediatrician who had grown up in a similar neighborhood and now ran a clinic serving low-income families, became an important mentor and collaborator. She helped Ronda understand the health implications of food insecurity and the ways that economic stress affected child development. "The thing you have to understand," Dr. Walsh explained during one of their meetings, is that poverty isn't just about not having enough money. It's about the constant stress of uncertainty, the way that affects brain development in children, the health problems that come from poor nutrition and inadequate health care. When we address food insecurity, we're not just feeding people. We're addressing a whole cascade of issues that affect families for generations. These conversations deepened Ronda's understanding of what she'd witnessed at the community center. Zara's quiet demeanor, her hypervigilance, her reluctance to ask for help, these weren't just personality traits, they were adaptations to chronic stress and uncertainty. The program they were developing began to take shape through a series of community meetings held at the center. Rather than designing something in isolation and then presenting it to families, Ronda and Maria invited community members to participate in the planning process from the beginning. The meetings were eye-opening for Ronda. She'd expected to be leading discussions about solutions, but instead found herself listening as parents, teenagers, and even some of the older children shared their insights about what their community needed and what had worked or failed in previous initiatives. "We don't need people to save us," said Carmen Rodriguez, a single mother of 3 who worked as a home health aide. "We need partners who understand that we're experts on our own lives and our own community. We know what the problems are, and we have ideas about solutions. What we need is support to implement those solutions." The wisdom in that statement reshaped Ronda's entire approach. Instead of seeing herself as someone bringing solutions to a community in need, she began to understand her role as someone who could provide resources and support for solutions that the community was already developing. Patricia Johnson became one of the key voices in these planning sessions. Her experience navigating the challenges of single parenthood while working in healthcare gave her unique insights into both the obstacles families faced and the resources that could make a real difference. What would help most, Patricia explained during one meeting, is having reliable support systems that we can count on during emergencies. Not just food assistance, but help with childcare when someone gets sick, transportation when a car breaks down, connections to job training programs that actually lead to better paying work. The program that emerged from these discussions was more comprehensive and community-driven than anything Ronda had initially envisioned. It included emergency assistance, but that was just one component of a broader initiative focused on building long-term stability and opportunity. The food security component went beyond traditional food banks to include community gardens, nutrition education, and cooking classes that helped families maximize their food budgets. The educational support included tutoring and homework help, but also college and career counseling for older students and adult education opportunities for parents. Perhaps most importantly, the program included a leadership development component that trained community members to become advocates and organizers, ensuring that the initiative would be sustainable and community-controlled rather than dependent on outside leadership. As the program development process continued, Ronda found herself changing in ways that went beyond her community involvement. The discipline and focus that had made her a successful athlete were now directed toward understanding complex social issues and building collaborative relationships. The competitive drive that had fueled her fighting career was channeled into advocacy and systemic change. The media attention was inevitable, but Ronda was determined to handle it differently than she had in the past. Instead of making herself the center of the story, she worked to amplify the voices of community members and highlight the systemic issues that created food insecurity and economic instability. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, who was writing a feature about her community involvement. "This is about families and communities that have been working to address these challenges long before I showed up. My role is to support their efforts and use whatever platform I have to draw attention to solutions that are already working." The interview was published with the headline, "From Fighter to Advocate, Ronda Rousey's New Battle." But the article itself focused primarily on the community members she was working with and the program they were developing together. It was the first time in years that Ronda had been featured in a major media story that wasn't about her personal drama or career controversies. The response to the article was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it led to connections with other organizations and individuals who were working on similar issues. Ronda began to understand that the challenges facing the Venice Beach community were part of larger patterns affecting communities across the country. 3 months after her first conversation with Zara, Ronda stood in the community center's main room, watching the launch event for what they'd decided to call the Community Resilience Initiative. The room was packed with families, community leaders, local officials, and representatives from partner organizations. Zara was there with her mother and brother, and Ronda was struck by how much the girl had changed since that first whispered confession. She was more confident, more engaged, and clearly thriving in an environment where her basic needs were met, and she felt supported. "Miss Ronda," Zara said, approaching her during the reception that followed the formal presentations, "I wanted to tell you something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "My teacher said I'm doing really good in school now, and Mama said it's because I don't have to worry about being hungry anymore. She said that when people help each other, everyone gets stronger." The simple statement captured something profound about what Ronda had learned over the past few months. Individual acts of kindness were important, but systemic change happened when communities came together to address root causes and build sustainable solutions. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Ronda found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A court-mandated community service assignment had become a calling. A chance encounter with a hungry child had revealed a community full of strength and wisdom, and her own search for purpose had led to a deeper understanding of what it meant to make a real difference in the world. The program they'd launched was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, setbacks and obstacles that would test their commitment and creativity. But Ronda had learned something important about herself and about the nature of meaningful work. The most important battles weren't always fought in arenas with crowds cheering. Sometimes they were fought in community centers and family kitchens, in school board meetings and city council chambers, in the quiet moments when someone chose to trust another person with their story. Patricia Johnson approached as Ronda was gathering her things to leave. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for the help with food and resources, but for listening to us and treating us like partners instead of charity cases. That's made all the difference." Ronda smiled, thinking about how much she'd learned from Patricia and other community members over the past few months. "I should be thanking you," she replied. "You've taught me more about strength and resilience than I ever learned in any gym or training facility." As she drove home that night, Ronda reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. The community service that had started as a legal obligation had become a source of purpose and meaning that she'd been searching for since her fighting career ended. The whispered confession of a hungry child had led to a comprehensive community program that was already making a difference in dozens of families' lives. But perhaps most importantly, she discovered that true strength wasn't about individual achievement or personal glory. It was about using whatever advantages and resources you had to lift up others and build stronger communities. The skills that had made her a champion in the octagon, discipline, persistence, strategic thinking, and the ability to perform under pressure, were just as valuable in this new arena. The Community Resilience Initiative would continue to grow and evolve, adapting to changing needs and expanding to serve more families. Ronda's role would continue to evolve as well, from volunteer to advocate to community partner. But the foundation had been laid, built on relationships of trust and mutual respect, grounded in the understanding that lasting change happened when communities were empowered to develop and implement their own solutions. 3 years later, the program had expanded to serve over 200 families and had become a model that was being replicated in other communities across California. Zara, now 11, was thriving in school and had become a peer mentor for younger children at the community center. Patricia had completed a nursing program and was working as a registered nurse at a local hospital, her increased income providing the stability her family had long sought. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or sudden. It had been gradual, built through countless small actions and sustained commitment. But the impact was undeniable, visible in the confidence of children who no longer worried about their next meal, in the strength of families who had access to reliable support systems, and in the vitality of a community that had been empowered to address its own challenges. For Ronda, the journey had been equally transformative. She'd found a new kind of purpose, one that was more sustainable and fulfilling than anything she'd experienced during her athletic career. The recognition and accolades were different, fewer headlines, smaller crowds, quieter celebrations, but the satisfaction was deeper and more lasting. The whispered confession of a hungry child had changed everything, not through a single dramatic moment, but through the sustained commitment to listen, learn, and act in partnership with a community that had always possessed the strength and wisdom to create change. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for personal glory, but for the simple dignity of ensuring that no child should ever have to whisper that they haven't eaten in 3 days. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.